Hello, everyone. My name is Calandra Waters-Lake. I am the Sustainability Director here at William & Mary. Thank you for joining us for Sustainabite. Sustainabite is our lunchtime information session. It's where we feature a university or local expert and their area through the lens of sustainability. And before we get started, I'd like to do this land acknowledgement. William & Mary acknowledges the Indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today, the Cheronhaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawamak, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. If you are looking for that land acknowledgement, maybe for one of your events, you can find that on the American Indian Resource Center site. Before we dive into our particular topic for today, I like to start off with a really general, what is sustainability? For us, we define sustainability at William & Mary as the dynamic interactions between society and the environment operating in ways that improve the well-being of all. This is relatively similar to most sustainability definitions within higher education. And this definition recognizes the interdependence of human and natural systems, looking to ecological principles as models, creating healthy, happy, resilient communities, as well as a healthy economy that recognizes ecological limits and decisions that recognize cause and effect across time and scale and place. So as you can see, sustainability is about more than surviving. It's really about thriving. And we think about it as an ongoing and intentional process. We also like to point towards the Sustainable Development Goals. If you're looking for ways that sustainability is really applied, we have a sustainability plan at William & Mary as well. If you're looking again at this sort of the international lens, the Sustainable Development Goals have a very interactive website, and I encourage you to check it out. Before we get into today's Sustainabite, I'd just like to remind everyone that we have a March Sustainabite coming as well. They're usually held on the third Thursday of the month. And so the March Sustainabite, we will be introducing Dr. Danielle Moretti-Langholtz. She's the director of the American Indian Resource Center and curator of Native American art at the Muscarel. And she's going to be talking about the influence of art to drive change with a focus on the art of Indigenous peoples. To today's speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Iyabo Obasanjo. She's the assistant professor in kinesiology and health sciences. And Dr. Obasanjo received her doctorate of veterinary medicine from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, a master's in preventative veterinary medicine from the University of California at Davis, and at Cornell, she received her PhD in epidemiology. And today she's going to be taking a look at pandemics and public health through that blended environmental, social, and economic lens of sustainability. Dr. Obasanjo, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. This is the coronavirus SARS, serious acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. That's the full name of the, so people will find SARS-CoV-2, which is the name. So as you can see, it's a simple organism, but this is the reason we're doing this by Zoom, because I assume that normally we'll be on a room on campus and we'll all be there eating our lunch together and listening and actually socializing during a talk like this. So how did this simple organism get to cause so much havoc? That is part of what the story I'm going to talk about and why sustainability is important. I'm going to focus on environmental sustainability, but it's all interrelated, right? So where do new human infectious diseases come from? It's not something we think about, or even all human diseases. The ones that are infectious, where do they come from? I am going to use the coronaviruses of the 21st century to give you a little bit of an example of where coronaviruses, where new organisms, microorganisms that infect humans come from. Before the 21st century, around the 1950s, three coronaviruses had been discovered that infect humans. Two of them cause such mild diseases that we call them, the disease that they cause, we call the common cold. It's so mild that, and very different from the flu virus, so mild that nobody researched it. It's very pervasive in human populations around the world. And it's thought to have been infected humans for millennia, right? Causes such mild symptoms and I'll get into why we think it's been with humans for millennia, because of the mild symptoms it causes. But there was no coronavirus that caused serious enough infection that led to even the symptoms you get with flu, in which people can be hospitalized, in which very mild, and usually the cold is almost a co-infection. If you're feeling sick, or your immune system is stressed somehow, you get the cold. No, very simple. But other species, like other groups of viruses, families of viruses, the coronavirus family have different other coronaviruses that infect other species, not non-human species. So the cat has its own coronavirus. The dog family have their own coronavirus. All of them causing mild symptoms in the species, which means really that they evolved with those species, with that species, and over millennia have specialized in the species they infect. Right? They might have all been the same. Thousands and thousands of years ago at some point, but it's differentiated to infect so that usually they don't cross species, because what they need to survive is so specialized to that species, the way they've modified themselves to go from host to host. So, but in 2002, there was an outbreak of a new disease, and it was first called an atypical pneumonia. Because it was strange, and it started in China. It was eventually named serious acute respiratory syndrome, found to infect each person infected was found to infect about 2 to 4 people. And it started in a southeastern region, province of China that is known for commercial. It's very close to Hong Kong and across the water from Taiwan. And it's where Guangdong is the name of the province, but the biggest city is Guangzhou. And that is where, when you hear people going to China to do manufacturing, it's Guangzhou. They usually go, all the small manufacturers that make, that you can give a spec to and be making in 24 hours. That's the area. So the outbreak started there, and it moved to Hong Kong. And it was actually when it got to Hong Kong that a huge global pandemic alert was raised. It ended up infecting about 8,000 people in 30 countries. It never spread to every country on the globe like COVID-19 has, and it ended up killing about 800 of those people. In the end, SARS disappeared. And really did disappear. And this was not because people, but it didn't disappear. It was chased out, right? And simple public health was used to chase it out. Once you know the virus, you test, you isolate infected cases, you quarantine, and then and you make sure that until people are non-infectious. And this was just what was global scale. Every country that it got to chased it down with simple public health methods that we've known since humans were humans, right? We know since humans, these are not new things, that if somebody gets an infection, has an infection, and somebody else is close to them, all the infectious diseases we know, even before we knew chronic non-infectious disease, that humanity has always kept people that have diseases away, especially if the disease was visible, something like smallpox or measles, because they know the next person gets it and that's how disease spread. Very simple techniques. The second coronavirus, but where did SARS come from? It was found to be, and this was found conclusively. It originated from a bat coronavirus, and the bat coronavirus changed enough to be able to then infect humans and then to be able to go from human to human. So that process, we don't know how long it took. The second coronavirus in the 21st century that was found was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. This was first found in Saudi Arabia, and it was found in camels first. And it was actually first found in people that handle camel and take care of them as part as their job. And the outbreaks are very sporadic, right? So it's not, we've not had a generalized pandemic as we've had with SARS or COVID-19, in which it's when those people, then the person that first gets it then starts to go human to human. And usually, because again, each person infects less than one person, it's less infectious. The biggest outbreak of MERS has been in South Korea around 2014-15 of a South Korean businessman that went to Saudi Arabia on a tourist, he went there for business, but he went on a tourist visit and climbed the camel. And it's common to do that for business people in Saudi Arabia. Contacted the virus, went back, got his symptoms started when he was in South Korea, went from hospital to hospital, infected people in the waiting rooms. Those ones infected people, and it became about 150 people. But the way we've dealt with MERS, and that I doubt it will ever become a general pandemic, but anything can happen in the world of disease, is that camels are tested now routinely in not only Saudi Arabia. There have been infection in all the Arabian Peninsula, all the countries where camels are used as either tourism or work or is just part of the culture. The last outbreak was in Somalia and Sudan, which also have camel culture, and that outbreak, they just kind of put down as many of the camels as they could to stop the infection. In Saudi Arabia and the wealthy Arab countries, they test all camels. So we don't even test people, we just test the camel. If a camel is positive, it's put down, and any other camel in contact with that one camel. So that is how that is handled on a regular basis. Then we come to late 2019. And I say this interesting fact because 2002, SARS started in November. The first cases were first noticed by physicians in Guangzhou in November. COVID-19 started in November. The first cases were first noticed in Wuhan, which is in Hubei province, which is also eastern. It's a little bit higher, it's not coastal, it's in the middle of the country, but it's in eastern China as well. This turns out to infect about 2 to 3 people, really. And started in China as well. This slide I got from Al Jazeera, and around May, June, Al Jazeera stopped updating the number of infections. So I'm stuck with it. So on the side, as of today, we have 110 million cases globally and 2.5 million deaths from this virus, this latest coronavirus of the 21st century, and 500,000 people have died from in the US. So 1 in 5 of the people dead are actually 20% of all deaths are in the US. So as you can see, COVID-19 turns out, as with SARS, came from the bat. So, but it's not the same virus. So this bat coronavirus, the same bat coronavirus, as in 2 different ways to be able to infect humans and then go from human to human. So what could be happening to bats? And the camel one too. So what is going on? Well, all the 3 coronaviruses are zoonotic diseases. And what are zoonotic diseases? Diseases that are transmitted from animals to humans and vice versa. Usually now, people kind of use it mostly from the diseases we get from animals, but it really should be used both ways. And then anthropozoonosis is used for diseases that humans transmit to animals. But this exchanging of microorganisms has been going on since humans evolved and since animals evolved. The microorganisms all around us were here before any animal was. 60% of all human diseases are zoonotic. So of all infectious diseases we know, 60% we get from other animals at some point. Some turn to human, like we've seen with these 3 cases of COVID, of coronaviruses, and 75% of emerging diseases. And so any new disease that is defined, 75% of them come from animals that are somehow, the animal is either the host or actually the carrier. And the host, it means that it actually gets infected too. A carrier means it doesn't get infected, but when then it will get to some other species and infect that. So can we eradicate zoonotic diseases? And because this is not a classroom, I'm not going to ask you to answer the question. Well, the answer is that it's very difficult. So what diseases have we targeted for global eradication as humanity, and why? Smallpox, polio, and measles have been targeted for eradication. The only one of those 3 that has been successful totally globally is smallpox. And why was it targeted? It was targeted because actually the smallpox vaccine, there was a very good vaccine, but the smallpox virus should not even be called smallpox. It should be called human pox, because it is the variation of the pox virus that infects only humans. And it's called smallpox because the other pox, sometimes you can get some of the other pox from animals. There's actually a monkey pox that actually can infect humans. Cowpox can cause some pustules, but it's larger. So this was the pox that caused little swellings on humans, and it's the human pox. It's only humans that infect. So the idea was that if we vaccinate all of humanity and we continue vaccinating them, and there's no way we will chase this virus out, and it worked. And it started country to country. And by 1980, humanity had chased the smallpox virus out of existence. There's still some in labs, but there's the idea that it might pop up somewhere, but it hasn't popped up. We do not have, there's no smallpox that has occurred anywhere to be detected since 1980. And with vaccination, if there was an animal host, we will then have to vaccinate the animal host, and it's a whole, different complicated system. Polio, the same thing. The polio virus that causes its main symptoms is paralysis, does not affect any other species, just humans. The similar viruses occurs in other species, or that particular. So we're using vaccination. That has not gone yet. There are 2 countries that still have wild polio circulating, but we're very close, so we can do it. Measles in the 80s was going to be next after polio, but anti-vaxxers has kind of shifted that. Measles is one of the main targets of the anti-vaccination movement. So measles has come back with a big round. But we could technically, given all the conditions that we have. And the other thing these 3 viruses have is that they're very visible, right? There's a way you can detect it, not just by testing. For smallpox, there will be pustule in the face. For polio, there will be paralysis. For measles, there'll also be a rash on the body. So it's like, it can't hide, right? So those are the targeted. There is actually, in my little gray circle at the bottom, there is actually an interesting eradication campaign that involves animals. So of the global eradication, there is only human-to-human diseases. Rabies, there's a US eradication program for rabies, which is an interesting zoonotic disease. Rabies affect all mammals, not just humans, any mammalian, and it's the same rabies virus, right? So there are about 2 or 3 cases a year of rabies, and it's usually from 2 sources that humans get rabies in the US now, and actually in the world. Most is from a dog bite. And so a rabid dog bites a human, and then the human gets so most of the time, if you have any pet, they get their rabies vaccine. When a person is bitten by a dog, then they get the toxoid. So we don't have vaccination for humans, but if you are exposed to any dog bite, toxoid, just as because it takes about 24 hours for symptoms to start. So if you get the toxoid before symptoms start, you can, but we don't even test. We just kind of give everybody giving a dog bite. In poorer countries of the world, rabies still occurs. It's still sporadic in most, but there are no epidemics of rabies that go on anymore. But in the US, the host that actually is the carrier, and we know that it circulates in naturally, is the raccoon. So what usually happens is that dogs and cats go into the bush, have contact with the raccoon, get rabies, and then bite a human. So the strategy here, but people vaccinate pets, right? So we're already controlling that by vaccinating pet animals. So the idea was, the only place rabies can be gotten is with raccoon. Why don't we try and eradicate it in raccoons? So what a strategy that is now going on, it's going to be like a 20, 30-year strategy, is putting food in forested areas around the country where rabies cases occur, so that raccoons can eat it and then they are vaccinated. So the essential thing is that it's probably going to be successful. It's just going to take a long time. That eventually there will be no rabies, because the raccoons that is host in the wild will stop having rabies. So no other mammal will get rabies, and will be done with rabies. And if this strategy works, usually what happens is that then, of course, other countries take it, and there's some kind of, but that is a zoonotic disease. But it's hard to eliminate zoonotic diseases, because you have to figure a way to also vaccinate all the animals that are involved, right? And especially with wild animals, how do you start? There was actually a case of yellow fever in Brazil a few years ago, in which they ended up vaccinating wild monkeys just to kind of stop the disease rate in humans. They had vaccinators go in, catch monkeys, vaccinate them against yellow fever, put them back in the wild, just to reduce the case. But it's not something you can do on a regular basis. We're going to keep sharing the planet with other animals and with microorganisms. The microorganisms specifically are the basis of life. We can't get rid of them. And in the Anthropocene era, humans, since the 1600s, what we've tried to do is control nature, right? And control each other to some extent with that. And it's to say, look, we are going to, and this is for economic growth, but we can have economic growth and still sustain microorganisms and have them be, and have other species live with us. Microorganisms have been here. They've evolved. Some are in our gut and help us digest food. Some are on our skin and help us actually have better skin. You don't want all the bacteria on your skin to be gone, because there are all kinds of things they've evolved with us. So these new organisms that are coming from animals, why are they coming? And why is it that it seems that we are having more of them? What are we doing? So one of the things I also want to mention is that we class some diseases as ancient diseases, or they are classed as ancient diseases, because we think they've been around humans for a long time. One of the reasons that the coronaviruses that are human coronaviruses cause so much mild symptoms is they thought that they've evolved with us so much that they've now they survive with us so that they can also live, and they cause no stress. When a new virus infects a species, although in its natural species, like the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, in its host in the bat, it causes very little. But once it comes to human, it's trying to figure out how to still survive, right? Like anything that has RNA or DNA, survival is in it. And all of us that have everything that has RNA or DNA is trying to change to survive in whatever terrain. Why are these viruses changing to infect humans? What is happening? So I've talked about this. The longer the virus has evolved with that organism and has been infected, usually the less virulent it is. Organisms evolve and mutate. So why are they evolving and mutating to infect humans more? Because I think my next slide will show you that we've had more new infectious disease outbreak in the first 20 years of the 21st century than we had in the last 50 years of the 20th. But even then, more new diseases are being found than we found. Most of the diseases that we cured or we found a way to cure in the century was diseases that have been around, they've been known. Now where new ones are showing up. So why are they doing? It seems to be the main that is going on is that the organisms that are their natural host are under stress. Humans and human beings, we're ever increasing, right? We have not reached static. So human population is increasing at a decreasing level. And what does that mean? We're still increasing, but the rate of human growth has decreased from the 20th century on till today. So the rate of human population growth is decreasing, but human population growth is still increasing. As part of our human population growth, we cut down forests, we'll build new houses. All the animals in the wild that live in all those places are getting moved to smaller and smaller areas. They're under stress. The organisms that live with them and have gotten a kind of a symbiotic or very little parasitism, they're not causing that. I'm saying, look, if my natural host is disappearing and the humans here, there are more and more of us, my survival means that I have to figure out how to infect this bigger organism. So we're stressing them into a way that we're actually making it, we're creating our own diseases by putting nature under stress. We have created the perfect storm of new diseases occurring because all these hosts are under stress. This is part of the evolving of new human pathogens that is making it faster and faster in the 21st century. So nature needs balance, right? We know nature needs balance. If you leave a piece of land and you let it grow naturally, the same tree never grows. If you see the same tree growing over and over, humans have intervened. Nature never puts the same tree over and over again. And there's actually, looking at the public health part of it, there's one of the theories for the increased rate of asthma in children is that because humans, we built this, when we say we're creating nature, our idea is to plant the same tree over and over again. And in nature, our immune system developed not to get the same pollen over and over again. So if you're in nature, there are people that actually have asthma. It was thought that people that have asthma, a lot of times it's the nature in the environment that is artificial that is causing the asthma to trigger. It's not nature in its raw form, because nature in its raw form does not have the excess of any pollen. So asthma is triggered more in children. It starts more in children because one pollen is overrepresented and it then triggers the immune system to go awry. So we interfere in a way that is unnatural, right? Nature does not do sameness in any ways. And even in its own, in genetic material of any breed, any inbreeding in any breed leads to high level congenital diseases and actually suboptimal, that breed is, the progenies are suboptimal. Diversity is what nature is and what it needs to be. And interfering with it is that we're changing that diversity, especially with raising farm animals in such large numbers, that the diseases that affect those farm animals then are overrepresented in nature. And then we're looking at the wild animals, sometimes we're killing them on purpose, but sometimes we're just living, and by doing that, we're making them less and less in nature and stressing them out. The organisms that infect them still want to survive too, and so they are looking at. And then in the farm animals, everything from the way we're using antibiotics and chemicals with them is also affecting us back, because the effluent from farm animals is sinking into our water systems, right? It's sinking. It's going to find a way to get somewhere. So again, all that, essentially everything is interrelated. The whole the whole of life. And it's not just human life, the whole of life in the smallest microorganism to the tiniest plant is all interrelated, and it's all in balance. And basically in the Anthropocene age, we are creating more unbalance in nature. The more of us there are, which is a good thing. I mean, humanity has come a long way. We've created a system in which we can actually survive in a very difficult terrain. Earth is not an easy place to conquer, and we've conquered it. But in conquering it, we're also destroying it. So the more we destroy nature, the more human life itself becomes unsustainable, right? Because that balance that created us, we're now putting into unbalance. And I'm going to use the water circle as an example here, in which that we don't create new water. If you are in a lab and you put 2 molecules of hydrogen and put 1 oxygen and you create water, that water is still going to go back into a circle. It will either eventually go back to hydrogen and oxygen and create new water somewhere. There's just one water. Just the same water flowing around, groundwater. And so if you do something to any of it, you create a problem for all of it, right? And we as humans, we do not think in terms of that level of bigness in our thinking. So there's only one water. There's not waters. The ocean, the river, the rain, it's the same water system, and we don't have more water coming. Although when we see rain, we think it's more water. It's the same water that has evaporated from somewhere and is drained from, it's the same water that we keep circulating on Earth. Again, every time we change something, we change the balance of that system that has gone on for millennia, and it lies with. So we need to restore balance. To stop pandemics, we need to maintain nature in some way, and we need to do it purposefully, right? Some of the things we've done against nature is for economic growth. Some of it is because we need to live, and yes, we do need to eat. And I do think that yes, there's room for eating fauna and flora, but also the idea that we need to create balance, that overrepresentation of anything on Earth is going to create a system that eventually will create an unsustainability for us as humans in this environment we find ourselves. So my conclusion is, to stop pandemics, we have to look at nature differently. How do we maintain all the species that we've found and make sure that they survive so that we can survive as well, both plants and animals? Because as long as they're in stress, they're going to give us stress. As long as their survival is shaky, the nature will respond by doing something to make our own survival shaky as well. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for having me, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Obasanjo. I'll look to our audience first. Do you all have any questions? Yeah, Jasmine.
Hello, thank you for presenting, Dr. Obasanjo. I was curious to know your opinion as to the use of disposables. I know that coming from a medical perspective, it's beneficial to have a lot of disposable products to protect the health of our bodies and to reduce the exposure to harmful diseases such as COVID-19. But at the same time, by doing so, we're also increasing the amount of waste that we produce. So I was curious what your opinion is on finding, I guess, that balance, as you say, between protecting our bodies and our health as humans in a society where we want to thrive, while also protecting our planet and not contributing to the degradation of it as much.
It depends on what material the disposable is. I grew up in a third world country. There were disposable, but the disposables were leaves. More, at least when I was growing up, things have changed. Even when I was growing up, it had changed quite a bit. But at least my grandmother's time, like they put food in leaves, right? Not plastic. And that kept it for a few days, just like plastic did. They used mud clay pots, right? That goes back to Earth. So it's not the disposable that it's the problem, it's the material the disposable is made of, right? And so I think the solution is to find how to create natural products that are also, and for also it's to create those products and also for people to be comfortable with it, right? My grandmother used leaves to keep and clay pots. Now that is out of fashion, right? Everybody wants a plastic thing. It's two things. It's for us to change and make nature acceptable again in a way, and also really disposables are good because you don't have to expose yourself to reusing something that might infect, that might have gotten some bacteria or some viruses exposed to it. It's the material we make the disposable from that I think is the issue. It's not the disposable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions?
I have one. At the beginning, you were talking about SARS and how it was from a bat, that it was identified coming from a bat. Could you tell us a little bit more about how it's determined where the origin of a COVID virus is from?
So I think that there's still not that much debate, although maybe a little bit, of that the COVID-19 virus too is from the same bad virus, from the same bad virus. So what happens is that then we can do the genetic coding of every virus now, right? And it can be done quickly. That is actually how they're looking for variants, the new variants of COVID-19. So when you check the genome, which was what the information on the genome of COVID-19 came out from China on January 12th. And once that came out, any country could create, or any lab that had the technology could create a test. Because what that tells you, it tells you the whole genetic material. And so how they knew it comes from that is that we know when China found this new virus, they first thought it was SARS, and so they didn't take it. Then they did the genetic code. They were able to say that it had enough differences from SARS that it was not SARS. And I read the paper, but I can't tell you. Oh, this is the drawing. There were issues with if you look at SARS, it seems it's similar, but there were enough differences that they knew it was a new virus because of, and so there are ways you calculate where the genetic changes occurred and when it occurred, and then you go back to all the viruses that are similar, and you can actually trace the changes, and sometimes you can even trace why the changes occurred if we know why that change occurred. For example, the spike viruses are important part of these red things, are important part of the COVID-19 viruses. We know that those spike viruses are so that it can glue to cells better, especially cells in the nose and in the mouth when it first infect. So we can, because we know some of the things that, we've studied enough of genetics of different microorganisms, so they could tell it came from the bat. They could tell that where it changed over time from that initial thing. And then over time, when they studied more, they could even tell you why it changed in those things to be able to infect humans more. Does that make sense? And the same thing with COVID-19. With COVID-19, it is a bad coronavirus. What we don't know is they don't think that it was a direct contact of humans to bats. They think there is a carrier. And you've all heard about the Wuhan wet market, that there was some civet or some lower mammal that was actually the carrier that doesn't show symptoms, that goes into the wild, has contact with bats, and then is brought into the market. Again, all those are still theory, but the fact that it came from the bat, I think that it was originally a bad virus. How it then changed, we don't know, or when it changed, because sometimes you can trace the changes. If you look at, and you can say, we know COVID-19 virus is changing because we now have variants, and some of those variants are occurring independently of each other.
I'm curious whether you can tease apart the two probably combined things of how how we're interacting more with and as we become as we say, tear up ecosystems and become involved, interact with species that we may not have interacted with before. That then, of course, provides a vector for us to get infected by these zoonotic diseases. How that can be teased apart from at the same time, we also are much better at communicating those diseases amongst ourselves. That I'm much more likely to be infected by somebody who got that disease in China these days than I would have been 50 years ago, because of travel.
Yes, globalization, and the benefit is that you can get food that was grown in the wilds of some part of the world within 24 hours, and you can fly there if you want within 24 hours. But the thing is that ride also means that microorganisms can spread quickly. So we're doing that, going into this is creating making ourselves really host for new organisms. When I talked about SARS and COVID-19, my third slide here, what I didn't mention was part of reason COVID spread so quickly versus SARS was that from the 1980s to around the 1990s, China started making Wuhan a transportation hub. So it was part of the centralized planning. Wuhan became where a lot of trains from all the, because the eastern part of China is the most developed, and then the west, so they were trying to create this hub that was not really on the coast, but so it will get, so tourists, business people, there's this idea that you come into this hub, international flight to so many parts of the world. They were trying to decongest Shanghai, which is people's destination, and Guangzhou, which is the other business, and say, look, there's a transportation hub. You will, the kind of forcing you to see more of China, right? Than going to these places that contributed so much to the quick spread of, so within 24 hours, I happen to know that when they looked at the number of, after finding out that there was a problem in Wuhan, and I think Wuhan was shut down January 6th. Between the time January 1, when China knew it had a problem, and January 6th, thousands of flights had left Wuhan already. And not only trains had left, and people had flown out of Wuhan to the rest of China, which of course later, I think they had to do it. The first shutdown Wuhan, but I think by the time they shut down Wuhan was maybe even the 15th. By the time they shut down, people had spread around the world. So that is when we should have known we were going to have a global problem. Compared to SARS, SARS started in Guangzhou, which is a commercial center. Only business people tend to go to Guangzhou, businessmen. And so the next place it went to that actually had a general spread was Hong Kong, because that's where Hong Kong is kind of the business part of it. Part of that story also includes the fact that at that time, Hong Kong was not so much, so there's also the political part, and this is the political part. So there's the transportation part that we are easily able to move, and Wuhan was the perfect storm of everybody leaving. Then the political part was that when it spread to Hong Kong in 2003, it was actually January that it got to Hong Kong. Hong Kong's health system was so much more prepared and so much able, and the Hong Kong health system was more it is now in 2003 that the Hong Kong Health Department did a national, an international uproar, started to work on it. It was actually the ones that did the first test and sequenced the virus. The woman that was the head of Hong Kong health system then, Margaret Chan, ended up being the head of WHO, because that fight gave her the prominence, and she was the last head of WHO before the current one, because she actually did she basically stopped that pandemic from becoming COVID-19. Then we now come to COVID-19, in which Hong Kong is now fully part of China, much more, in which the Hong Kong Health Department, even when it's seeing cases, could not say, look, we have a problem here. So again, a lot of things. So the social, the economic, all that came together to create the perfect storm for COVID-19. I hope that long, convoluted story answered your question.
Not long or convoluted, just shows all the interconnections. Do we have another question from the audience?
Hi, Iyabo. What kind of changes or lessons have been learned from COVID-19 as far as reporting for the future on a global scale?
Oh, I think we're still learning the lessons. I think there will be lessons to be, and I'll say that there will be books as big as the number of books that we'll be reading on this pandemic at the end of the day. Even 100 years from now, they'll still be writing about it because it's certainly on that scale of an occurrence in terms of what occurred here. I think we have to look at several things. The WHO has to be looked at in terms of a lot of things, but it's not. I think of COVID-19 as the perfect storm for a pandemic. I think the US health system was also dependent on, if you look at with what it did with Ebola, even HIV/AIDS, to help, right? So that didn't happen with COVID-19. So basically, so the WHO, China itself. So to create, I think this is an opportunity for a new global health system to be created that is more effective and that everybody starts to play his role. I think, does that mean that maybe the US role has to change? Because maybe China's role has to change. WHO has to do things differently. Other countries' roles to have to change. I think what is happening now, though, is not this kind of structured change, is that every country is saying, okay, I need to build my own now, which is not going to help us because this is a pandemic. It's an epidemic is if it's in one country. It's a pandemic. We have to work together on it. So I think we haven't learned the lesson yet, but something has to be done in order that this does not happen again. I mean, for me as an epidemiologist, if you ask me, I'm going to say this will happen again. I don't know when or how. Exactly the same, given the structures we have on the ground now, because I don't think we've done the things to make that change that will make it. New viruses will come. I have no doubt about that. Whether we can respond to stop it being a pandemic and creating the kind of havoc COVID-19 has, I don't think we're there yet.
Wonder, does our industrial food system make it more likely that a virus like this could invade multiple species quickly? I'm guessing that before we transported things around, if a virus occurred, it would have caused a small local effect, but have a little bit harder time infecting an entire, millions of animals. But maybe something to do with our current system makes that harder to deal with, or more likely that it could go very large quickly.
Yes, our industrial processes, what it has caused is for animal diseases of the food animals that we have, we raise really in very, very unhealthy ways for the animals themselves, spread quickly. So we've had pandemics in animals that have spread quicker and devastated everything from pig species to any of those animals we raise closely together. But the other part of that is that because we raise them so closely together, we can also treat them very quickly. For most animal diseases, you put the vaccine or the drug in their food or water, right? Because you're raising them very all together. The problem with that, though, is that some of the biggest problem with farm-raised animal is actually antimicrobial resistance and some other kind of, because what then happens is that wild animals usually then cross-infect. There have been cases in which chicken farms gave diseases to wild birds, right? And then that organism kind of changed in some ways and could eventually infect humans. So there are all kinds of things. We do put those animals under a lot of stress, but also that helps us manage them. The consequence is that it also affects the wild species of those animals in ways that sometimes we don't even see the consequence until 30, 40, 50 years later of what we are doing. And part of the biggest issue in farm-raised animals is antimicrobial resistance that gets into our water system and gets it so that then humans are resistant to bacteria they've never been exposed to because it's the bacteria showed up in water. The antimicrobial showed up in water they've been drinking and they didn't. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in industrial food production. I don't know if I have a solution to it. because I don't think we can go back to where everybody had 10 goats or 10 sheep. It's a very complicated problem.
I noticed that management often means complete eradication.
Yes, unfortunately.
But was it the mink that there was somewhere in Scandinavia, there was a lot of animals that were destroyed for COVID.
Yes, I think it was somewhere in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
I'm a veterinarian. If a disease outbreak occurs in a farm, we kill all the animals. That's the standard practice. You kill, and usually rich governments then compensate the farmers. So we have disease outbreaks, and that's the US has it. You kill all those animals because that's how you stop it from spreading. You compensate the farmers for their loss, and life goes on. And so that is how we manage it. How to manage it? Probably not. We never look for the source of it. We never really try and solve the problem. We kill our way out of it. Essentially, it's worked for some time now. For 100 years and more. Whether we can continue to do it that way. So we don't use public health. We don't separate out the animals. We don't try and test the animals. We just do, it's a blunt, it's kind of a very drastic way to solve the problem, which we can't do with humans, right? So we have to solve the problem in humans, and we haven't figured that out yet. Using the same tools that we should have used in the animal, testing, isolation for cases, quarantine for contact, and all that. I think there were some questions in the chat. Did you see that?
I do, yeah, just some people saying thank you. I had one last question, unless there was anyone else who wanted to chime in. So a lot of us on this call are either students or working in higher education, and I was wondering if you had any advice for how faculty, staff, or students can have some sort of action. What can they do to help prevent the next pandemic, or to help mitigate this one? Is there anything that higher education is positioned to do that can really do the most good in this area?
I think for higher education, we should do what we do and do it better. Train students to solve all these problems in ways that they bring new ideas and new ways of looking at the problem. It's obvious that from the 1600s on, sort of, we humans have changed the earth more than it has changed in all the times before. There's actually a period of global, there was a period of global cooling in the 1600s that coincides with the death of native tribes in North and South America. Nobody has the actual count, but it's thought that 1 million people died. So that cooling is what we've been warming from since then. So before then, and what happened was that with those people, that 1 million people gone on Earth in one, more than that, we don't know, they were cooking, they had animals, so all the things they did that contributed to carbon emissions just from their natural living. Then we stopped that, and then we started, of course, the internal combustion engine. So we have to, students can contribute by retraining them, to give them the tools to be critical thinkers and look for new solutions. Hopefully, it won't be the kinds of solutions we had before, which was to destroy nature in order to live. It will be solutions that we can live and nature can also survive. And so I think that's our contribution. And there won't be one solution. There will be several things that have to come back in play. We have to look at some of the ways, and you talked about native tribes, some of the way some tribes had lived, what kind of all this, not only in the Americas, but all parts of the world, what were the things, how did they do disposables that we can bring back? What of it is just to create more sustainability? I hope that answers, but I think it's just to think about it and look for new ways of creating new ideas around this issue.
Thank you. I definitely answers my question. Well, I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Obasanjo, for doing this presentation. We really appreciate it. It was extremely informative. Thank everyone for attending. And I wanted to give one more shout out to a future event. The Institute for Integrative Conservation is also going to be taking a dive into this topic in the fall. They'll have a panel discussion on public health and conservation that I think, Iyabo, you might be involved with as well, as well as a new course called One Health that's going to focus on the intersection between people, animals, and their environment. So if you want to learn more about this, the IIC will also be featuring some of this in the fall. If you have any other questions, please let us know. Otherwise, I hope you had a great lunchtime session. And thank you again to Dr. Obasanjo for an outstanding presentation and conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.